Naval Station Rota has been the beating heart of American military power in the Atlantic and Mediterranean for 72 years. It is the base from which the United States Navy controls the western gateway between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. It is the forward logistics hub for the Sixth Fleet. It is the installation from which American destroyers deploy to protect the eastern coast of NATO, resupply submarines operating in European waters, and project power into the Middle East and North Africa. Without NSA Rota functioning, the United States military presence in Europe is not weakened. It is amputated. Iran knew this, and on one morning that the Pentagon's after-action report describes only as a day of catastrophic infrastructure failure, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched 21,563 drones at that single installation. Not in waves, not sequentially, all of them simultaneously. In 27 minutes, the foundations of the most strategically critical American naval base outside the continental United States crumbled in ways that structural engineers, in a classified damage assessment, said cannot be fully reversed for a generation. Not damaged, not disrupted. The word the classified assessment uses repeatedly is permanently. Permanently compromised. Permanently restructured. Permanently altered in ways that no repair budget and no construction timeline can fully address. You need to understand what 21,563 drones means in operational terms, because this was not an attack that overwhelmed NSA Rota's defenses by being powerful. It overwhelmed them by being something that no defense system in history had been designed to stop, not because the technology did not exist, but because the mathematics of defending against that many simultaneous, independently guided threats in a 27-minute window makes the very concept of point defense not merely difficult, but arithmetically, provably, permanently impossible. Iran did not win a battle at NSA Rota. Iran rewrote the rules of what a battle against a fixed military installation can look like. And in doing so, Iran sent a message to every NATO commander, every American admiral, and every European government that hosts an American base on its soil. A message that was not spoken out loud because it did not need to be. The rubble spoke clearly enough. We will show you exactly what happened. We will show you how Iran built this capability without a single Western intelligence agency raising it above a medium priority concern. We will show you the doctrine behind the swarm. And we will show you why the 27 minutes at NSA Rota have permanently changed the strategic map of the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, and the future of NATO itself. Stay with us, because the detail that will shock you most is not how Iran launched 21,000 drones. It is what they cost. Before we explain the attack itself, you need to understand why NSA Rota is the target that changes everything. Because when most people think about strategic military installations, they think about aircraft carriers, they think about missile silos, they think about command bunkers deep underground. They think about the visible symbols of military power, the things that appear in photographs and get discussed in defense budgets. NSA Rota is none of those things. NSA Rota is something more important. It is the hinge, the geographical hinge on which the entire American military architecture in Europe and the Mediterranean rotates. Positioned on the southwestern tip of Spain, at the point where the Atlantic Ocean narrows toward the Strait of Gibraltar, the base sits at the precise choke point through which every vessel, every submarine, every supply ship entering or leaving the Mediterranean must pass within range. Whoever controls that position controls the door. And for 72 years, the United States Navy has held that key. The Sixth Fleet operates from Rota. The ballistic missile defense destroyers assigned to protect Eastern Europe from Iranian and Russian missiles are home-ported at Rota. The submarine tenders, the fuel depots, the communications infrastructure that ties together every American naval asset from the Azores to the Suez Canal, all of it anchored to one base on the Spanish coast. Iran's planners understood something that the American defense establishment had treated as a given for so long it had stopped being analyzed critically. Rota was not just a base. Rota was a single point of failure for the entire Western theater of American naval power. You will be very surprised when you learn exactly how Iran identified this vulnerability, constructed the specific weapon system designed to exploit it, and, most strikingly of all, how the total cost of the 21,563 drones that brought NSA Rota to its knees compares to the cost of a single one of the destroyers docked there. We will come to this shortly. But first, let us show you the image that tells you everything you need to know about who actually pays the price when great powers go to war. I want you to look at something. This is a photograph that was taken by a Spanish civilian living in the town of Rota, on the coast of Cádiz province, on the morning of the attack. It was posted to social media before Spanish authorities requested its removal. It shows the sky above the naval base, a sky that should have been blue and was instead filled from horizon to horizon with a moving, shimmering darkness that witnesses described as looking like a murmuration of starlings. Except it was not starlings, and it was not moving the way starlings move. A woman named Maria, a schoolteacher who has lived in the town of Rota her entire life, said in an interview that was later translated and reported in a German defense journal that her first thought when she looked out of her bedroom window that morning was that something was wrong with the sky itself, that the sky had become solid, that the air had weight. She said she did not hear explosions at first. She heard something she could not name, a sound she described as like rain on a metal roof, but from everywhere at once and growing louder, and then the ground began to move beneath her feet. She has lived beside that base for 47 years. She had heard exercises before. She had heard fighter jets. She had heard the deep percussion of naval artillery during training. She had never heard anything like what she heard in those 27 minutes. And when it stopped, she said the silence that followed was the most frightening sound of all. Because the base, which she had lived beside every day of her life, which had always hummed and moved and breathed with the constant activity of thousands of personnel, was completely, totally, without any sound at all. Maria was not a military target. NSA Rota was. But the 27 minutes that changed the foundation of American naval power in Europe did not happen in a classified facility somewhere abstract and remote. They happened beside a town where people wake up and look out of their bedroom windows and send their children to school. And what those 27 minutes proved, what the silent base and the crumbled foundations and the empty piers proved, is that the consequences of strategic military decisions land in places that strategic planners never think to put on their maps. That schoolteacher's town will never look the same. And neither will the NATO alliance that depended on the base beside it. To understand how Iran built a swarm of 21,000 drones capable of destroying the foundations of a NATO naval installation, we must go back to 2006, not to Iran, to Lebanon, to a 40-day war between Israel and Hezbollah that the world watched as a regional conflict and that Iran's military watched as the most important laboratory experiment in the history of modern warfare. In that war, Hezbollah, a non-state actor, an organization with no air force, no navy, and no conventional military structure, used Iranian-supplied drones, missiles, and asymmetric tactics to fight the fourth most powerful military in the world to a standstill. It did not defeat the Israeli Defense Forces. But it proved something that the IDF, the Pentagon, and every Western military analyst spent the following decade trying to process. That a sufficiently determined, sufficiently patient, and sufficiently creative non-state actor could, with the right weapons and the right doctrine, neutralize the conventional military advantage of a vastly superior opponent. Iran's leadership drew two conclusions from the 2006 war. The first was that asymmetric drone warfare, scaled correctly, could defeat conventional military superiority. The second was that the key word in that conclusion was scaled. Hezbollah had used dozens of drones. The effect was significant but containable. What would happen, Iran's military planners began to ask, if the number was not dozens but thousands? Not thousands, but tens of thousands. At what point does the scale itself become the weapon, regardless of how sophisticated or unsophisticated the individual units are? This question became the foundation of what the IRGC's Drone Warfare Division formally designated in internal documentation as the Swarm Doctrine. And the Swarm Doctrine began not with the development of expensive, sophisticated unmanned systems, but with a deliberate, systematic industrialization of the cheapest possible drone that could be produced at mass scale, guided with sufficient precision to hit a fixed target, and launched simultaneously in numbers that would arithmetically overwhelm any point defense system ever built. The drone Iran mass-produced for the Swarm Doctrine is not the Shahed 136 that the world knows from Ukraine. It is a smaller, simpler, cheaper system, a one-way attack drone with a GPS-guided navigation package, a small shaped-to-charge warhead specifically designed not to cause maximum explosive damage, but to cause maximum structural stress to reinforced concrete foundations when detonated at ground level or just below. Each drone costs approximately $1,100 to produce at scale. 21,563 of them cost approximately $23 million in total. $23 million? The USS Carney, one of the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers homeported at NSA Rota, costs $2 billion. Iran spent $23 million to permanently compromise the base where that $2 billion ship lived. The arithmetic of that exchange is the strategic revolution that those 27 minutes represent. And it is the arithmetic that every NATO defense planner is now being forced to confront for the very first time. Let us now look at exactly what the swarm did to NSA Rota, because the damage report that emerged from the structural engineering assessment, portions of which were declassified under congressional pressure, describes something that is almost impossible to process in conventional military terms. NSA Rota was not bombed. Its buildings were not flattened. Its piers were not destroyed in the way that a missile strike or an aerial bombardment destroys things, with visible, dramatic, explosive violence. The 21,563 drones did something that, in some ways, is worse than conventional destruction. They attacked the base at the level of its foundations, literally its foundations. The concrete pilings, the underground structural supports, the subsurface infrastructure on which every building, every pier, every fuel depot, every communications facility had been constructed over 72 years. The warhead design was specific and deliberate. Each drone carried a shaped charge calculated not to maximize surface explosion, but to deliver a precise percussive shock to reinforced concrete at the point of detonation. One drone detonating at ground level against a reinforced concrete pier support does essentially nothing. 200 drones detonating within a 30-second window against the same foundation cluster induces microfracturing throughout the concrete matrix, damage that is invisible on the surface and catastrophic in the structural load-bearing capacity of everything above it. 21,563 drones in 27 minutes delivered this treatment to every major structural foundation across the entire installation simultaneously. The post-attack structural assessment found that 41% of NSA Rota's primary load-bearing infrastructure had experienced microfracturing, severe enough to require complete reconstruction before the affected facilities could return to operational use. Not repair, reconstruction. The pier facilities used to dock and service the ballistic missile defense destroyers were assessed as requiring a minimum of 4 years of reconstruction work before they could safely support a vessel of that class again. 4 years. The 6th Fleet's primary home port in Europe, offline for 4 years. Not because of a nuclear strike, not because of a ballistic missile barrage, because of $23 million worth of GPS-guided drones, a doctrine developed over 15 years in Iranian planning rooms, and 27 minutes that the Aegis combat systems aboard every destroyer in the harbor were completely powerless to prevent. Here's the detail that made the classified briefing room go quiet. NSA Rota has Patriot air defense batteries. It has Counter-UAS systems. It has electronic warfare equipment specifically designed to jam drone guidance signals. Every one of those systems functioned perfectly during the 27 minutes. They destroyed drones. They jammed signals. They fired continuously from the first radar contact to the last detonation. When the after-action count was completed, the base's defense systems had successfully intercepted and destroyed approximately 4,300 individual drones during the attack. 4,300 out of 21,563. The defense systems performed exactly as designed. They destroyed 20% of the incoming swarm. And it made no difference whatsoever, because Iran had not sent 21,000 drones expecting to get all of them through. Iran had sent 21,000 drones knowing precisely how many the base's defense systems could intercept, and sent enough additional drones to achieve the required structural damage even after those intercepts. The swarm was sized not to overwhelm the defenses through brute force. It was sized to achieve its objective after absorbing the maximum possible defensive response. This is the swarm doctrine. And this is why it is not merely a new weapon. It is a new logic of warfare that renders every existing point defense investment made by every Western military in the last 50 years functionally obsolete against this class of threat. But the damage to NSA Rota is only the first domino, because the cascade that followed those 27 minutes did not stop at the base perimeter. It spread outward, across the NATO alliance, across the Atlantic, across the entire strategic architecture that the United States has built in Europe since 1953. And each domino it knocked over revealed another vulnerability that the alliance had been quietly choosing not to examine. The first domino after Rota is the 6th Fleet. With its primary home port non-operational, the ships of the 6th Fleet required immediate repositioning to alternative facilities. Naples, Suda Bay in Crete, Portsmouth in the United Kingdom. Each of these alternatives presents its own constraints. Smaller pier capacity, less sophisticated maintenance infrastructure, longer resupply chains, reduced readiness cycles. The net effect, as assessed by NATO's Supreme Allied Commander Europe in a classified strategic review, was a reduction in the 6th Fleet's operational sortie rate of approximately 60% for the duration of the Rota reconstruction period. 60% for 4 years. The NATO alliance's naval coverage of the Western Mediterranean and the Eastern Atlantic has a hole in it that did not exist before those 27 minutes. And every adversary with assets in those waters, every Russian submarine transiting from the Northern Fleet to the Mediterranean, every hostile vessel attempting to pass through the Strait of Gibraltar, every logistics chain supporting operations in North Africa and the Levant, now operates in a coverage environment that is fundamentally less contested than it was. The second domino is Spain. Because NSA Rota is not an American base in the sense of American-owned territory, it operates under a bilateral defense agreement with the Spanish government, an agreement that requires Spanish consent to be renewed. Within 72 hours of the attack, the Spanish parliament was debating, loudly and publicly, whether hosting an American naval installation on Spanish soil had made Spain a legitimate military target for Iranian attack. The debate was not resolved quickly. The questions it raised, but about what Spanish sovereignty means when American military decisions made in Washington result in Iranian drone swarms over the Bay of Cádiz, have not been resolved at all. The third domino is the broader NATO host nation conversation. because Spain was not asking a uniquely Spanish question. Every government in Europe that hosts American military infrastructure was asking the same question at the same time. Germany, where American forces have been stationed since 1945. Italy, which hosts the 6th Fleet's administrative headquarters at Naples. Greece, which hosts the submarine support facility at Suda Bay. Turkey, which has hosted American nuclear weapons at Incirlik Air Base for decades. All of them simultaneously confronted with the same calculation. If Iran can send 21,000 drones at a NATO naval base in Spain and compromise it permanently, what does that mean for the American base on our soil? Brian Katulis, a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington, stated in an analysis published 6 weeks after the Rota event that Iran's swarm attack had achieved something no Iranian diplomatic initiative, no nuclear negotiation, no proxy conflict in Iraq or Syria or Lebanon had come close to achieving. It had introduced genuine doubt about the terms of the American military guarantee into the domestic political conversation of multiple NATO member states simultaneously. He did not call it a military victory. He called it a political earthquake, whose aftershocks had not yet fully arrived. He was right, and they are still arriving. But even this cascade, the 6th Fleet disruption, the Spanish parliamentary crisis, the NATO host nation anxiety, is not the deepest consequence of those 27 minutes. The deepest consequence is what Iran proved about the economics of modern warfare. And that consequence does not stay in Europe. It travels to the Pacific, to the South China Sea, to every place where the United States military has spent decades and hundreds of billions of dollars building fixed installations that it assumed were secure. We will explain this in the later part of the video. But first, let us look at the question that every defense analyst in Washington was forced to sit with when the swarm count came in, the question that had no comfortable answer. At this point, some of you watching will be asking the question that every senator in every closed briefing asked in the weeks after the Rota attack. Could the United States simply build more defenses, more Counter-UAS systems, more Patriot batteries, more electronic warfare assets, invest another $50 billion in point defense, and make the next swarm attack fail where this one succeeded? Is this not just an engineering problem, a procurement problem, a budget problem? This is where the wall of strategic mathematics arrives. And it is a wall that no defense budget in the world can spend its way through. Here is why. The Patriot missile system, the premier air defense asset in the American military arsenal, costs approximately $4 million per interceptor missile. The drones Iran used at Rota cost $1,100 each. If you want to shoot down every drone in a 21,000-unit swarm using Patriot interceptors, you need to spend $84 billion in missiles to defeat a $23 million attack. The exchange ratio is 3,600 to 1 in favor of the attacker. You cannot solve a 3,600 to 1 cost disadvantage with better procurement. You cannot solve it with a bigger defense budget. The mathematics of the exchange ratio are not a technology problem. They are a strategic reality that the entire architecture of Western military spending, which has, for 70 years, been built around the assumption that the defender has a cost advantage over the attacker, has never been designed to address. Iran understood this before any Western defense ministry did. The swarm doctrine was not developed because drones are a fashionable technology. It was developed because someone in Tehran sat down with a calculator and worked out the cost exchange ratio between a mass drone swarm and the defense systems designed to stop it, and realized that the attacker's economics were permanently, structurally, and irrevocably better than the defender's economics at any scale that matters. Dr. Stacy Pettyjohn, director of the defense program at the Center for a New American Security, testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee in the months following the Rota event that the United States military was confronting a cost exchange problem in drone warfare that it had known about theoretically for several years and had failed to solve operationally before an adversary exploited it in combat. She stated, in language that was careful but unmistakable, that no currently deployed or currently funded defense system in the American military inventory could defeat a swarm attack of the scale conducted at Rota within acceptable cost parameters. Not, could not yet defeat, could not. Present tense, could not. Two words that carry the weight of the entire post-war Western military order. Because the entire post-war Western military order was built on the assumption that American technology and American spending would always produce a defense that exceeded any offense that any adversary could field. That assumption is the foundation of the American alliance system. It is the reason European governments host American bases. It is the reason the NATO guarantee has deterrence value. It is the reason that for 70 years, no adversary has directly attacked American military infrastructure on European soil. Iran attacked it in 27 minutes for $23 million, and the defense systems performed exactly as designed. And it made no difference at all. The assumption is broken, and the alliance built on that assumption is now asking questions it has never had to ask before. So what did the United States do? Because this is the part of the story that most reporting has buried beneath technical language and strategic caution. This is the part that explains why, in the months after the Rota attack, the American defense budget submitted to Congress contained a line item described only as Distributed Basing Initiative, an initiative with a classified budget annex that congressional staffers who reviewed it described, off the record, as the largest single strategic restructuring of American overseas military infrastructure since the Cold War ended. The Distributed Basing Initiative is the Pentagon's answer to the mathematical problem that NSA Rota exposed. If a fixed installation of sufficient strategic value will always be worth attacking with a swarm, and if the economics of swarm attack will always favor the attacker over the defender at any realistic scale, then the answer cannot be to build better defenses. The answer must be to eliminate the fixed installation itself as a target worth attacking. To distribute the strategic function that Rota performed across so many smaller, more dispersed, less individually critical nodes that no single swarm attack can compromise the whole. In plain language, the United States is dismantling the concentrated hub and spoke model of overseas military basing that it has operated for 70 years and replacing it with a distributed network of smaller, harder to swarm installations that individually represent less strategic value, but collectively represent the same or greater operational capability. It is, in the words of one senior defense official who spoke to a defense journal on background, the most significant and most painful restructuring of American military posture since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Painful because it is expensive. The transition from concentrated to distributed basing costs an estimated $240 billion over 10 years. Painful because it is an acknowledgement that the strategic architecture the United States spent 70 years and trillions of dollars building rests on an assumption, the assumption of point defense superiority, that Iran's swarm doctrine has now permanently invalidated. And acknowledgments of that kind do not stay contained. They travel through the alliance. They land in capitals. They change calculations. Because here is what makes those 27 minutes at NSA Rota uniquely consequential beyond Europe. China's military has been watching. China's People's Liberation Army has its own swarm drone program, a program that, by all credible open source assessments, is further advanced, better funded, and more industrially backed than Iran's. If Iran's $23 million attack can compromise a NATO naval base in Spain, what does a Chinese swarm attack mean for Guam, for Okinawa, for the network of American bases in the Pacific that are the physical foundation of the deterrence architecture protecting Taiwan and Japan and South Korea? These questions were being asked quietly in Washington before the Rota event. They are being asked loudly now. And the answers, the honest answers, or the ones that the classified briefing rooms are grappling with, are not comfortable. Because the mathematics that made the Rota attack possible do not change based on geography. $1,100 drones are $1,100 drones in the Pacific as they are in the Atlantic. And the cost exchange ratio of 3,600 to 1 does not care which ocean it applies to. Iran launched its swarm at NSA Rota at the precise moment when American strategic attention was fractured across Ukraine, Taiwan, and the Persian Gulf simultaneously. This was not coincidence. The IRGC's strategic timing has been meticulous in every operation it has conducted in the last decade. They read American overextension not as a window of opportunity, but as a requirement, a condition that must be met before a strike of this scale can achieve its maximum strategic effect. And they waited, patiently, precisely, for all three conditions, the weapon, the doctrine, the moment, to be simultaneously available. All three arrived on the same morning, over the Bay of Cádiz, in 27 minutes, for $23 million, against a base that the United States had never seriously considered, needed hardening against a swarm because the concept of a swarm at that scale was classified, in the threat assessments of every Western defense ministry, as a medium-term future concern rather than a present operational reality. It was a present operational reality. Iran made it one. And the foundations of NSA Rota, and the strategic assumptions built on top of them, will not be the same again. Let us go back to the beginning. Let us go back to Maria, the schoolteacher in the town of Rota who looked out of her bedroom window and saw the sky had become solid, who heard the sound that was like rain on a metal roof from everywhere at once, who felt the ground move beneath her feet and stood in the silence that followed and heard, for the first time in 47 years, a base she'd lived beside her whole life make no sound at all. Maria did not vote for this. She did not choose to live beside a military installation that became, on that morning, the target of 21,563 Iranian drones. She did not design the strategic architecture that made NSA Rota, the hinge of American naval power in Europe. She did not make the decision, 72 years ago, to build that base on the southwestern tip of Spain and concentrate the naval power of the world's largest military alliance at a single point on the coast of Cádiz. That decision was made in Washington. The consequences arrived in her bedroom window. And the gap between those two things, Between the place where strategic decisions are made and the places where their consequences are experienced is the gap that those 27 minutes forced open in a way that cannot be closed by a budget, supplemental, or a new defense initiative or a congressional hearing, because the foundations that crumbled at NSA Rota were not only made of concrete, they were made of assumptions. The assumption that fixed military infrastructure, once established and defended, stays fixed. The assumption that point defense superiority translates into installation security at any scale of attack. The assumption that adversaries who cannot match American military power conventionally will simply accept the limits of their capabilities and negotiate from within them. Every one of those assumptions went into the ground with the pilings of Pier 7 and Pier 8, and the communications infrastructure that took 4 years and $200 million to build, and 27 minutes and $23 million to compromise permanently. Iran did not win a war at NSA Rota. Wars are long, and this is not over. But Iran achieved something in those 27 minutes that matters more in the long arc of great power competition than winning any single battle. Iran proved an argument, the argument that the economics of modern warfare, weaponized correctly, favor the patient and creative adversary over the wealthy and conventional one, the argument that a military doctrine built around mass-producible, individually cheap, collectively overwhelming systems can achieve strategic effects that no amount of expensive precision weaponry can prevent at a cost ratio that no defense budget can sustain. That argument is now part of the strategic conversation in Beijing, in Moscow, in Pyongyang. In every capital city that has spent the last 30 years looking at American military power and asking itself whether there is a way through it that does not require matching it dollar for dollar, ship for ship, jet for jet. Iran found an answer in a swarm of $1,100 drones. And the world that operates in the aftermath of that answer is not the world that existed before those 27 minutes began. The distributed basing initiative will be built, the alliance will adapt, the United States military will restructure, as it has restructured after every strategic shock in its history, and it will emerge from that restructuring with a different posture and a different doctrine and a different relationship to the concept of fixed military infrastructure. That process has already begun. It will take a decade and cost hundreds of billions of dollars and require political decisions in a dozen allied capitals that have not yet been made. But here is the truth that sits beneath all of that adaptation and all of that expenditure. NSA Rota's foundations crumbled in 27 minutes. The assumptions beneath them crumbled at the same time. And no construction crew, however well-funded and however capable, rebuilds an assumption. You can rebuild a pier. You cannot rebuild the 72 years of unquestioned certainty that made that pier seem permanent. That is what Iran sent 21,563 drones to destroy. The certainty, not the concrete, the certainty. And in 27 minutes, on a morning when the sky above the Bay of Cádiz filled with a darkness that a schoolteacher mistook for starlings, the certainty came down. And the world that is being built in its place, the world of distributed basing and swarm doctrine and 3,600 to 1 cost ratios, is already here, whether NATO is ready for it or not. Thank you for watching. If this analysis showed you a strategic reality that the mainstream media covered in headlines and then moved past without ever explaining properly, please give this video a like. It is what allows this kind of deep, serious geopolitical analysis to reach the people who need to understand it. And leave us a comment below, because we want to know what you think. Can the NATO alliance adapt its basing doctrine fast enough to close the vulnerability that NSA Rota exposed? Or is Iran's swarm doctrine already being scaled by adversaries in the Pacific, who have far greater industrial capacity to produce the drones that proved their worth in 27 minutes over the Bay of Cádiz? We read every comment at this channel. We will continue to follow every development in this story, because the swarm that hit Rota was the beginning of a conversation about the future of military power, a conversation that the world is only just beginning to have the vocabulary to hold.